Dustwood, Texas, a rural town where endless fields of golden wheat sway under a relentless sun. The Gray family farm, a 2,000-acre property passed down through generations, sits isolated at the edge of town. The farmhouse, weathered but proud, creaks with the weight of memories. Daniel Gray stood at the edge of his porch, squinting at the horizon. The morning sun burned through the haze, casting long shadows over the barren fields he'd left fallow this season. His calloused hands gripped a chipped coffee mug, the same one his wife, Clara, had bought him at a county fair years ago. He didn't farm much these days, not since the accident. The screen door slammed behind him as he stepped inside, the smell of dust and loneliness clinging to the air. The farmhouse was frozen in time. Clara's floral apron still hung on the kitchen hook, their daughter Emily's crayon drawings yellowed on the fridge. He avoided the living room, where her hospital bed had once been. For years, he thought, for years, and I still hear her voice in the walls. A knock shattered the silence. Daniel frowned. Visitors were rare. Through the peephole, he recognized Paul Morrison, his late father's lawyer, a wiry man in his 60s with a permanent frown. Daniel opened the door, the Texas heat rushing in. "Daniel," Paul said, removing his hat. His voice was grave. "We need to talk." They sat at the kitchen table, the ceiling fan whirring overhead. Paul slid a manila envelope across the scratched wood. Inside were legal documents stamped with red letters. Final notice of auction. "They sold it, Daniel," Paul said quietly. "The HOA. They auctioned off 1,700 acres of your land last week. To some corporate outfit called Sunrise Corporation." Daniel's throat tightened. "What the hell are you talking about? My family's owned this land since 1923. The HOA's got no right." "They do," Paul interrupted. He pulled out a brittle, yellowed page from the envelope. "Your grandfather signed a covenant in 1955, agreeing to HOA oversight for community development. Back then, it was just about sharing irrigation costs. But the bylaws, they've changed." Daniel stared at the document. The faded ink included a clause he'd never noticed. Failure to pay annual dues or penalties grants the HOA authority to liquidate assets to settle debts. Debts? I don't owe those vultures a damn thing. Daniel's fist hit the table, rattling the coffee mugs. Paul sighed. "According to them, you do. They've been mailing fee notices to an old P.O. box, the one your grandfather used. You haven't paid HOA dues in 8 years, Daniel. With late penalties, they claim you owe over $250,000. Bullshit. No one told me about any dues." Daniel's voice rose, echoing through the empty house. "And since when does the HOA control my land?" "Since your grandfather handed them the keys," Paul said grimly. "The covenant was never updated. Legally, they had the right to foreclose." Daniel stormed out to the barn, Paul trailing behind. The air smelled of hay and diesel. He climbed into his rusted Ford pickup, fishing a key from the visor. The engine coughed to life, and he sped toward the northern fields, the heart of the auctioned land. The tires kicked up dust as he passed the oak tree where he'd proposed to Clara. Further ahead, the crumbling remains of his great-grandfather's homestead came into view. This land was his blood, his daughter's future. But when he reached the property line, his stomach dropped. Bright orange stakes marked the soil every 50 feet. A sign nailed to a post read, "Sunrise Corp., future site of Solar Farm District." "Solar Farm," Daniel muttered. "They're turning my fields into a damn power plant?" Paul caught up, panting. "Sunrise paid $12 million. The HOA gets a cut. They've already filed eviction papers. You've got 30 days to vacate." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Over my dead body." That night, Daniel sat in his study, bourbon in hand, staring at the land deeds spread across his desk. His eyes drifted to a faded photograph on the wall. His father shaking hands with a man in a suit. The caption read, "Green Harvest Co-op, 1998. Green Harvest." A memory flickered, his father's raspy voice on his deathbed. "Don't ever sell those shares, Danny. They're your lifeline." Daniel yanked open a desk drawer, digging past tax files and old receipts. Beneath them lay a sealed envelope. Inside was a stock certificate, 40% ownership, Green Harvest Food Distribution. He hadn't thought about it in years. His father had inherited the shares from a business deal gone sour, a silent stake in the company that supplied most of the town's groceries. Daniel had dismissed it as worthless. Until now, a plan began to form. He grabbed his phone, Googling Green Harvest. The company's homepage loaded. Feeding Texas since 1971, 80% market share in Dustwood region. Daniel's lips curled into a cold smile. The HOA took my land, but they forgot who feeds this town. At dawn, Daniel drove to the tiny Green Harvest office on Main Street. The receptionist blinked in surprise. Nobody had seen him in town since Clara's funeral. "I need to speak to the CEO," he said, slapping the stock certificate on the counter. 30 minutes later, he sat across from CEO Margaret Lowe, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s. She examined the certificate, then nodded slowly. "This is legitimate. You're our largest single shareholder." Daniel leaned forward. "I want an emergency board meeting. Today." Margaret hesitated. "May I ask why?" "Because starting tomorrow," Daniel said, his voice steady, "Green Harvest stops all food shipments to Dustwood." As Daniel left the office, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you're clever? Tell the truth about your wife's accident, or the whole town will." He froze, the blood draining from his face. Behind him, a black SUV idled at the curb. The tinted window rolled down just enough to reveal a woman's smirk. Linda Carter, HOA president. The window rolled up, and the car sped away. Daniel's hands trembled. They knew, but so did he. Daniel sat in his truck outside Dustwood Market, watching a crowd argue over the last crate of wilted lettuce. A handwritten sign hung on the door. "No meat, no dairy, no answers." His embargo was working. His phone buzzed. A voicemail from Sheriff Collins. "Gray, half the town wants you tarred and feathered. The other half's too hungry to care. Call me." Daniel deleted it. He drove to the old barn, where he'd hidden the stock certificate and HOA documents in a rusted safe buried beneath hay bales. But as he stepped inside, a metallic glint caught his eye. A silver pendant, shaped like a dove, lay in the dust. Clara's pendant. She'd been wearing it the night she died. "You shouldn't be here," a voice rasped. Daniel spun. Old Tom Cooper, his former farmhand, leaned against the doorway, his face gaunt. "They're watching you. Linda's people. Let them watch," Daniel snapped, pocketing the pendant. Tom hesitated. "That HOA fella, the one who voted against your land sale? They found him in his garage this morning. Car engine running." Daniel froze. "Who?" "Ben Riley. Left a note, they say." Ben's ranch sat 5 miles east, police tape fluttering around its perimeter. Daniel parked behind a squad car and approached, ignoring the deputy's shout. Sheriff Collins, a barrel-chested man with a handlebar mustache, blocked his path. "This ain't your business, Gray." "Ben was the only one on that board with a spine," Daniel said. "You really buying this suicide bullshit?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Notes said he felt guilty about your land. Now get lost before I arrest you for trespassing." But as the sheriff turned, Daniel spotted a slip of paper half buried in the dirt near Ben's mailbox. He palmed it while the deputy wasn't looking. Back in his truck, he unfolded the note. 2 lines, scribbled in haste. "They made me vote yes. The casino debt isn't mine. Tell my wife I'm sorry." A phone number followed. That night, Daniel dialed the number. A woman answered, her voice shaky. "Ben's widow." "He didn't kill himself," she hissed. "Ben didn't even drive that car. It was Linda's." "What casino debt?" Daniel pressed. A pause. "Last year, Ben borrowed money from some men to pay his son's hospital bills. Linda offered to wipe it clean if he voted for your land sale. But after the vote, they doubled the debt." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Who's they?" The line went dead. At sunrise, Daniel stormed into the Green Harvest warehouse. where Margaret Lowe oversaw a skeletal crew loading trucks bound for other towns. "You're playing with fire," Margaret said, not looking up from her clipboard. "The board wants to revoke your shares." "Let them try," Daniel said. "I need a favor." She finally met his gaze. "What kind?" "A list of every HOA member's financial ties to Sunrise Corporation." Margaret smirked. "You think I'm a magician?" "No. But you're the only one who knows Green Harvest shipping 20% less produce than last quarter. You skimmed the profits to cover your divorce. Should I tell the board?" Her face whitened. "You're bluffing." Daniel leaned closer. "Try me." An hour later, Daniel sat in a diner booth, nursing black coffee. A man in a hoodie slid in across from him. "Jake, Margaret's IT consultant." "Got your list," Jake muttered, passing a USB drive. "But if Linda finds out I hacked her accounts." Daniel scanned the files on Jake's laptop. Bank transfers, emails, a $2 million payment from Sunrise Corp to an offshore account labeled LC Consulting. Linda Carter. "There's more," Jake said, clicking a video file. Security footage showed Linda at a blackjack table in a neon-lit casino, stacking chips next to a man with a serpent tattoo on his neck. "Who's that?" Daniel asked. "Vincent Rossi. Runs the underground joints near Houston. Linda's been borrowing from him for years." Jake swallowed. "She's into him for $5 million. Sunrise was her payday." Daniel copied the files. "What about the land? Why's Sunrise want it so bad?" Jake hesitated. "Rumor is they found something under your fields. Oil maybe, but there's a soil report buried in their servers. You ain't gonna like it." He opened a document titled Toxic Screening Gray Property. Daniel's pulse spiked. Arsenic. Lead. Levels 300% above EPA limits. "They knew," Daniel whispered. "Sunrise knew the land's poisoned." Jake nodded. "That's why they're rushing. Once they pour concrete, nobody'll test it." Daniel drove home, the USB drive burning in his pocket. But as he turned onto his dirt road, headlights blinded him. A black SUV rammed his tailgate, forcing him into a ditch. Vincent Rossi stepped out, his serpent tattoo glinting in the moonlight. Two thugs flanked him. "Mr. Gray," Vincent drawled. "Linda says you've been misbehaving." Daniel reached for his glove box, but a thug yanked him out. Vincent pressed a knife to Daniel's throat. "Call off the embargo, or I'll mail Clara's pendant to the sheriff with your fingerprints on it." Daniel froze. "How did they? You think we didn't know?" Vincent sneered. "About the accident? About how you begged her to drive to the pharmacy that night. The knife drew blood. Drop the food ban, or everyone finds out you killed her." Daniel stumbled into his farmhouse at 3 a.m., his shirt stained with dirt and blood. He hurled the USB drive at the wall, screaming into the silence. Clara's face stared back from a photo on the mantel. "You promised to protect Emily," her voice seemed to whisper. "What's left of her if they take you too?" He grabbed his phone, dialing Margaret. "Call off the embargo," he said hoarsely. "What?" she snapped. "After all this, do it." He hung up, then texted Linda's burner number, found in Ben's files. "The food starts tomorrow. Stay away from my daughter." Her reply was instant. "Smart man, but the land's already gone. P.S. Say hi to Clara." Daniel collapsed into a chair, clutching the toxic soil report. They think they've won, but poison can't be buried forever. Daniel stood in the pre-dawn gloom, staring at the toxic soil report glowing on his laptop. The words "arsenic levels lethal to human contact" pulsed in his mind. He'd spent nights mapping the contamination. It spread beyond his land, seeping toward the town's water table. He uploaded the files to a burner email, fingers hovering over the send button. Sheriff, mayor, local news. One click, and Sunrise Corp's lies would implode. A floorboard creaked behind him. Emily stood in the doorway, her college backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad? I thought you were asleep." He snapped the laptop shut. "Just work stuff. You heading back to campus?" She frowned at the piled HOA documents. You're still fighting them, aren't you? Even after they made you stop the food thing. Daniel hesitated. This isn't about land anymore, Em. People could get sick. Sick how? Before he could answer, tires crunched on gravel. A white van with Dustwood Gazette on the side rolled up. A reporter climbed out, microphone in hand. Mr. Gray, residents report rashes after touching well water. Care to comment on rumors your property's contaminated? Daniel shoved Emily behind him. No comment. The reporter pressed closer. Is it true Sunrise Corp plans to build on toxic land? Emily's grip tightened on his arm. Dad? Megan T. My kid's vomiting. They say it's Gray's poison. Carl R. HOA sold us out. Daniel sped toward town hall, Emily in the passenger seat. A mob surrounded the HOA office, hurling empty food cans at Linda's Porsche. Sheriff Collins blocked the door, shouting into a megaphone, "Go home! EPA's testing the water." "Too late!" a farmer yelled, holding up a red-spotted arm. "My cattle are dying." Linda emerged, sunglasses hiding bruised eyes. "This is Daniel Gray's revenge," she shouted. "He falsified reports to sabotage progress." The crowd roared, divided. Emily grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "We need to leave. Now." Back at the farm, Daniel pulled Emily into the barn. "Listen carefully. There's a safe in Tulsa under your name. Deeds? Cash. The soil reports. Stop talking like you're dying." Emily snapped. "Come with me." Tires screeched outside. Vincent Rossi's SUV skidded into the yard, followed by a black sedan. Linda stepped out, clutching a pistol. "Time's up, Daniel," she called. "Give us the originals, or your kid learns what real poison feels like." Daniel shoved Emily toward the hidden safe under the hayloft. "Run. Now." Vincent's thugs kicked open the barn door. Daniel faced Linda, hands raised. "The EPA's already got the files. Killing me won't help." "But it'll feel good," Linda hissed. She aimed at his chest. "You ruined everything. Like you ruined Ben Riley?" Daniel countered. "Or Clara." Linda's hand twitched. "Clara's accident was your fault. You sent her out in that storm because you were too drunk to drive." Emily gasped from the shadows. Daniel's voice broke. "I know." Vincent chuckled. Daddy's got guilt. Let's fix that." He nodded to a thug, who dragged Emily kicking into the light. "Sign this," Linda said, tossing land transfer papers at Daniel's feet. "Or we dump her in your toxic creek." Daniel scrawled his name, eyes locked on Emily. "Let her go." Linda smirked. "Vincent? The girl." The mobster shoved Emily toward the door. She stumbled, then spun, flinging a handful of pesticide powder from the barn shelf into Vincent's eyes. "Emily!" Daniel lunged as gunfire erupted. A bullet grazed his shoulder. He tackled Linda, their struggle knocking over a lantern. Flames licked the dry hay. Vincent staggered outside, screaming, "My eyes!" as Emily sprinted to the truck. Daniel pinned Linda amid the spreading fire. "Who else knew about the toxins?" She laughed, coughing smoke. "Your precious daddy. He sold Green Harvest waste here for years." The revelation struck harder than any bullet. Emily honked the horn, screaming, "Dad!" Daniel staggered back as flames engulfed Linda's hair. She writhed, howling. He ran, leaping into the truck as the barn collapsed. Emily floored the gas, rearview mirror reflecting orange hellfire. "Where now?" she sobbed. Daniel clutched his bleeding arm. "FBI office. Dallas." Behind them, sirens wailed. 2 hours later, parked at a deserted gas station, Daniel scrolled through encrypted files on Linda's stolen phone. Emily watched, pale. "Grandpa really? Dumped chemical waste to save Green Harvest," Daniel whispered, showing her 1980s invoices. "He created the poison." Emily's tears fell on a photo of Clara tending sunflowers, now a toxic wasteland. "So Mom died because of my family's lies," Daniel finished. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Lowe. "Sunrise stock crashed. FBI raided HOA. Where are you?" Daniel deleted it. "We can't run forever," Emily said quietly. He started the engine. "We're not running. We're testifying." Daniel sat in a sterile interrogation room, his bandaged arm throbbing. Across the table, Agent Reyes slid a photo of the burned barn. Forensics found Linda Carter's remains, but Vincent Rossi's still out there. "You're lucky to be alive." Emily, seated beside him, placed the soil report on the table. "Sunrise knew. So did my grandfather. What happens to our land now?" Reyes exchanged a glance with her partner. "EPA's designating it a Superfund site. It'll be quarantined for decades." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And the people who poisoned it? Your father's dead. Linda's dead. As for Sunrise's CEO?" Reyes tapped a folder labeled plea deal. "He's rolling over on Rossi. We'll have arrests by sundown." Emily stood abruptly. "What about us? We almost died exposing this." "Sit down, Miss Gray," Reyes said coolly. "Your father's still under investigation for Clara's accident." Daniel met her gaze. "I'll confess to everything. Just keep Emily safe." Emily's eyes widened. "Dad!" A phone buzzed. Reyes read the text, then stood. "Rossi's men just hit a convoy near Waco. They're coming for you." Rain lashed the safe house windows as Daniel paced. Emily glared at the U.S. Marshal posted by the door. "We're sitting ducks here." Daniel checked his burner phone. A message from Margaret Lowe. "Meet me at Green Harvest Depot 12. Bring the shares." He showed Emily. "It's a trap. Or our only play," she countered. "We can't hide forever." At midnight, they slipped past the marshal, stealing his keys. The Green Harvest warehouse loomed in the industrial district, its lights off. Daniel aimed his stolen pistol at the shadows. "Margaret!" A forklift engine roared to life, headlights blinding them. Vincent Rossi stepped into view, his eyes bandaged, a shotgun leveled at Emily. "Where's my money, Gray?" he rasped. Margaret emerged from the office, clutching a briefcase. "The shares, Daniel, or he splatters her brains." Daniel tossed the stock certificate. Margaret verified it, then nodded to Vincent. The mobster grinned. "Thanks for the billion-dollar company. Now!" Emily lunged, slamming a pallet jack into his knees. The shotgun blasted ceiling tiles as Daniel tackled Margaret. "Traitor!" Daniel snarled, pinning her. "You helped them poison your own town." Margaret spat blood. "Your father begged me to hide the waste. Said he'd make me CEO." Vincent staggered up, aiming at Emily. "Enough talk." Sirens wailed. FBI SUVs plowed through the loading bay doors. "Drop the weapon," Reyes shouted. Vincent fired wild. A bullet struck Margaret's chest as agents returned fire. Emily dragged Daniel behind a crate. "Look!" Vincent fled toward a waiting helicopter, its rotors whipping rain into frenzy. Daniel commandeered a forklift, ramming the helicopter's landing skid. The craft tilted, rotor chewing concrete. Vincent leapt into the cockpit. "You're dead, Gray." Emily grabbed a flare gun from the wall, firing through the windshield. The cabin erupted in flames. The chopper listed, crashing into a fuel tanker. The explosion lit the night sky. At dawn, Daniel stood before Dustwood's surviving residents in the charred town hall. Sheriff Collins cuffed the remaining HOA board members as TV cameras rolled. Emily handed Daniel the mic. "My family lied to you," he began, voice raw. "We let poison fester under your homes. But the HOA sold your futures to cover their greed." He tossed Sunrise Corp's soil reports into the crowd. A farmer shouted, "Our kids are sick. What now?" Daniel lifted the Green Harvest shares. "These control 80% of your food. Today, I'm transferring them to a community trust. Every dollar funds cleanup and healthcare." The crowd murmured, stunned. Agent Reyes approached. "The FBI's seizing HOA assets. Their properties will be auctioned." Daniel smiled coldly. "I'll be bidding with their money." 1 year later, Emily guided a group of teenagers through rows of sunflowers blooming in hydroponic greenhouses. Beyond the glass, solar panels stretched across Daniel's reclaimed fields, detoxifying the soil. "Why's that guy so mad?" a kid asked, pointing to a man in overalls shoveling compost. Emily smirked. "That's Mr. Haskins. He used to be on the HOA board. Now he works for us." Daniel joined her, watching former HOA elites toil under the Texas sun. "They sold our land, but never guessed they'd farm it." Emily squeezed his hand. "Mom would have loved this." Somewhere in the fields, a radio played Clara's favorite Patsy Cline song. Daniel's phone buzzed, a notification. Green Harvest Trust donates $10 million to toxicology research. He looked at the thriving crops, the clean soil, and whispered, "We fed them poison. Now we grow hope."